Well, hello. Welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us. Brian Gulland is an English classically trained musician who has specialized in creating medieval and Renaissance music, most notably as a member of the band Gryphon. After graduating from the Royal College of Music in London, Brian hooked up with fellow RCM student Richard Harvey, Graeme Taylor, and Dave Oberle to form the aforementioned Gryphon in 1972. Playing such non-traditional instruments as the bassoon and the krumhorn, Mr. Gulland and the band released 5 albums during the 70s, splitting up in 1977. Fast forward to 2009 and a reunion one-off performance. Then came 2 new albums, one in 2018, the first in 41 years, and a second in 2020. There have also been several compilation releases over the years. Brian has also been a member of the new Scorpion band, done a little acting, and enjoys playing cricket. Well, welcome, Brian.
Lovely, thank you very much. Good introduction.
Thank you. I did a little bit of research. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Where were you born?
Down to the south of London in the county of Kent.
All righty. Talk a little bit about your childhood memories.
Childhood memories, okay. When I was 3.5, we moved from our little house in the suburb of Maidstone, which is the county town of Kent, to a large, rambling, decrepit house on the North Downs, on the edge of a village, about 4 miles from Maidstone, and huge garden and paddock. And my brother and I were able to play cowboys and Indians and whatever, build model airplanes, fly them, run around shrieking without disturbing anybody.
Did you have your holster with the cap pistols?
I did, and the full sheriff's outfit.
All right.
And we had a wigwam too.
Ah, okay. Well, who got to play the Indian?
We were quite democratic about that. We used to alternate.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, do you remember hearing music being played in the household when you were young?
Yes, my father was musical. His father had studied music at Durham University in the north of England and was an organist. Dad played the piano pretty well, and he also deputized for church organists in the area when they were ill or on holiday. Mum sang and played the piano a bit, although my dad's family were quite snobbish about music, and she was made to feel like an also-ran, so she would only play the piano when Dad was at the office.
Okay, all right.
Then at the age of 8, I became a choir boy at Canterbury Cathedral, which is also in the county of Kent.
Okay.
And we had to learn the piano and one other instrument. Well, I had already been learning the piano for a couple of years by then.
Mm-hmm.
And I plumped for the bassoon because after the first term of being a new boy, when we were allowed to encouraged to watch the orchestral rehearsal once a week from the rest of the choir boys, I think I plumped for the rather farty deep noise of the bassoon. Irresistible at that age.
Yes, it is. You can make your own personal, or you can use an instrument to make that noise. Yeah.
Indeed.
Well, do you remember one of the first singles or albums that someone bought for you, or that you purchased?
Yeah, the first single I bought was Hoots Mon by Lord Rockingham's 11,
Yes, yes.
which was a pretty good thing. And then the second one was Mole in the Hole by the Southlanders, which I only recently found out was an Australian outfit, the Southlanders, but it was very funny. Then I bought my first 33 vinyl LP, which was by a wonderful English guitarist, songwriter, who had his own band, and he's still going. He was a great friend of George Harrison's, Joe Brown.
Joe Brown, yes.
Joe
yes.
Brown and the Brothers.
And the Brothers, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. He is, how old is he now? Like he's got to be.
Oh, he must be about 132, I should think. No, probably. Well, I bought that album when I was 10 or 11, so he must have been.
Yeah.
He would have been 10 years older than me, I guess. So he'd be at least 84 by now.
84 in the shade. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Well, what other artists, musicians, bands were you into as a teenager?
Well, even before teenagers, at the choir school, there were 2 or 3 of us who were dead keen on boogie woogie piano. So as well as having to practice the piano every day and the other instrument, we would spend a lot of time practicing boogie woogie, working out Beatles arrangements on the piano, Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry. So as well as being angelic little choir boys, we were also getting down and dirty.
Yes, it sounds like it.
To use an American expression.
I was trying to think of can't think of her name, the black piano player that played that style, that boogie woogie. That was from England. Oh,
Winifred Atwell.
Yes, there you go.
She was Australian.
Ah, was she? Okay.
Yeah, she used to tour. She was very well known in England, you're quite right. Yeah, she used to tour with a piano, and she would accept whatever piano was at the gig, but she had this piano that she toured around with her called the other piano, which was tuned slightly out of tune, that the third string of each note was tuned slightly sharp or flat, which gave that honky-tonk feel.
Yes.
She was a really good pianist, and I think tried to be a concert pianist, and like 999 out of every 1,000 would be concert pianists. Maybe she didn't quite make it. I don't know, but she turned to honky tonk, and she used to do medleys of popular tunes like Bye Bye Blackbird and all the rest.
Yeah. And
I absolutely loved her stuff. So you were right on the money there.
We'll talk a little bit about being enrolled in the Royal College of Music in London. Were you a bit
before that,
mm-hmm.
When my voice broke, I was, or changed as they insist on calling it now, I was useless to the choir. But like most choir boys, at least from that cathedral, I got a music scholarship to my next school. And by the age of 15, my woodwind teacher, who was primarily a clarinet, flute and sax man, said, "Look, Brown, I'm not a bassoonist. I've taught you all I know. You should get some private lessons." And that coincided with me getting into the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. And the tutor of the bassoons was a lovely, lovely man who I'm still in contact with. He's also about 137. And I used to go up once every fortnight to London, which was great for me, a day off boarding school, and have lessons with him. And it was a couple of years after that that I enrolled in the Royal College of Music, still with the ambition of playing bassoon in an orchestra. However, shortly after I got there, I had a big rethink, down to various reasons, which we don't need to go into.
Okay.
And I suddenly thought, well, this will be great sitting in the back of an orchestra for 40 years. However, I don't feel totally comfortable with just recreating the music that was there.
Yeah.
And managers of orchestras aren't keen. If you decide to put a little twiddle at the end of a phrase in a Mozart symphony, they just want the notes and no more than the notes. And at the same time, I was thinking, well, I'd like to actually write music, some new music, and be part of what was going on. This was 1969 when I went there. So I got the tail end of the hippie thing. And already at school, in the last 3 or 4 years, I was very keen on the West Coast psychedelic groups. In fact, in the summer holidays of my penultimate year at school, I went to my first gig. It was up in London with a school friend. Funnily enough, he just rang me before this started. And it was the Doors and the Jefferson Airplane.
Okay.
And I was never quite the same. I think probably the slippery slope for the orchestral career probably started from that day, or night rather. It was a thing called From Dusk Till Dawn, Implosion.
Right.
Absolutely fantastic, both of them. We were standing right in front of Grace Slick's vocal speaker. And boy, was that powerful.
They put on quite a show, I imagine. Yeah. How was
So did the Doors.
Yeah, I was going to ask how Jim Morrison was. What kind of shape was he in?
He was very late on for the second set. No exclamation given. And then he turned quite magnificently obscene in the middle of, and started improvising some pretty juicy lyrics, which we won't go into now.
Right.
Unbroadcastable.
Right. Well, you do have that in your CV that you did get to see them. Well, talk about what were London Pro Musica and Musica Reservata?
Okay, these were two serious bow tie concert hall type groups. In fact, they were the only two groups at the time who were playing medieval and Renaissance music.
Okay.
And I toured with Musica Reservata in the summer holidays straight after I'd left college. We went off to play the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and then on to Berlin and Vienna. And that was quite an adventure going through, because going from Berlin to Vienna, we had to go through the Eastern Bloc.
Yeah.
And the management, if you can call it that, of this little group of Musica Reservata, there were about a dozen of us, decided that the only way I was going to get through without being arrested was to dress me in the concert gear of evening dress with the black tie. So that was done. And yes, we got through.
So they snuck you through.
They snuck me through.
Good deal. Hate to hear what would have happened if you'd been held up there. Oh, okay. Not a good story.
I could still be there now.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. We'll talk about how Gryphon came together. First, who came up with the name?
That was the result of 2 or 3 evenings of communal head scratching. I should just explain first how we came to form.
Okay.
Richard Harvey and I my mate from the Royal College, started playing with a lute player in a little tiny little restaurant in London called the Teddy Bear's Picnic. And we then exchanged the lute player for a school friend of Richard's called Graeme Taylor, who's still with us. And the proprietor of the restaurant was a young hippie, and he volunteered to manage us. And he wanted to call us something ridiculous, which we wouldn't have anything to do with. And we finally came up with Gryphon, and he said, yeah, okay, that's good. And it was because it's a hybrid of, it's the front end of an eagle, the king of the air, and the back end of a lion, the king of the beasts. And that described, and still does describe, our very multi-styled, non-categorizable music, I would say.
Yes. Were you the front end or the back end?
I used to ride on top.
Okay. Good answer. Well, so were all of the members of similar minds and wanting to create this kind of folk medieval style music?
Yes, it came about that because we did this strange Tudor, Elizabethan and centuries before dances, there wasn't a natural outlet for us. But we did a couple of floor spots in a folk club, and they kind of embraced us and took us to their heart. So we thought, right, well, if we're in folk clubs, we better do some folk songs. And Graeme Taylor had a little book with about 64 English folk songs, and we would journey into those. Very often we'd either take the lyrics and write new music for it, or decide that the tune was half decent and change the words. That carried on for about a year, and we made our first record, which was, we were still completely acoustic 4-piece at that stage. We were taken on by this little English folk label called Transatlantic Records. We were just so dead keen to get on record. And we made the classic error of not getting a lawyer to look at the contract, and they stitched us up like a good one. And we also made the second cardinal error of giving them our publishing, which he should never, ever do.
Right.
And it wasn't until much later, when Yes's manager took us under his wing and managed us for a bit, that he managed to get us out of the contract. But we'd already done 4 out of the 5 albums that we were signed up for then. I'm jumping ahead a bit.
No, chalk that up to inexperience and youth, and you guys hadn't been through that kind of situation before, so that's that. There are sharks out there, and there always have been, that are just, they're mouth watering for that kind of situation. Take advantage.
Yes, exactly. Yes, we were lambs to the slaughter, really.
Right. Well, I wanted to ask you. You mentioned being signed to Transatlantic. In '73, your first album came out, recorded in an attic.
Yes, most of it was. It was recorded by a very eccentric friend of ours who specialized in medieval cello, called the bass viol, the bass member of the viol consort. But he was also dead keen on recording, and he had 4 Revox stereo tape machines synced together with something called Bill's Box, which was a very primitive pre-MIDI syncing device. But it did mean that every time an edit was needed, he would have to edit 4 separate pieces of tape. But he was so clever at that. He used to do mid-air edits and make diamond-shaped edits with a pair of scissors and then snip them back together again. But it does, of course, it's nothing like what we call phase accurate, which is what happens in the computer if you want to switch something around and make an edit. So it does give a particularly individual sound to that first record, which I find very pleasing.
I do too myself. I didn't know the history behind that, but that's interesting to hear that. So all involved, the other members, producer, were okay with using the bassoon and krumhorn to fill out the sound. They're all on board.
Well, yes, it was an integral part of the sound. In fact, amongst other things, I used to play all the bass lines, and then I would go shooting off and doing little elaborate bits and then fall back to the bass again. That was it for the first album.
Yeah. Well, the second album, Midnight Mushrooms, came out in '74. This time, the band recorded in an actual studio.
Yes, we did. A wonderful residential facility out in Oxfordshire called Chipping Norton, where Stevie Winwood had recorded, Billy Connolly, the Humble Bums, Jerry Rafferty, any number of, it was a really well-respected residential place. 16 track, I think, in those days, probably.
Okay. All right.
And we had, we then expanded to having a bass player playing electric bass. Richard Harvey having just played a harmonium and a keyboard glockenspiel on the first album, which was made in Illinois, funnily enough. I always remember that.
Is that right?
He then had an electric piano and a tabletop chamber organ, which kind of impersonated a small chapel organ, but was very effective. I can't remember whether he had the Moog synthesizer for that album. I don't think he did. I think that was the next album, Red Queen to Gryphon 3, also recorded in '74. He definitely did by then, I know.
Well, talk a little bit about what the experience was like writing and recording music for the stage production of The Tempest.
It's all a little bit hazy. It was produced by, well, he's now called Sir Peter Hall, but he was Peter Hall. And it featured the granddaddy of, one of the granddaddies of English acting at the time, Sir John Gielgud.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure how he got the gig. He must have come to one of our gigs, I suppose, concerts. Yeah, it's all a little bit hazy, along the lines of, if you can remember the '70s, you weren't there.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Well, I guess the show was at the Old Vic, right? The big show.
Yes, we were having recorded the music for The Tempest. We were invited to go and do a concert at the Old Vic Theatre. And as far as I know, we're the only band ever to have been invited to play there. In the same way that we were also invited to go and play at one of the prestigious, very old established museums, the Victoria and Albert Museum, also in London. And we played in a lecture theatre to about 350 schoolgirls. And it's the closest we've ever been to getting mobbed afterwards.
I was going to say, were they tearing at your clothes and screaming?
Not quite, but they were dead keen to get autographs and to say hello in a big way, which was
Okay, I can imagine. Well, let's go fast forward a little bit to your third album, Red Queen to Gryphon 3. And this one was recorded with more traditional instruments, right?
traditional in terms of a rock band.
Rock band, yes. Yeah.
Yes, Richard had a Moog synthesizer by then. Graeme Taylor had moved to also playing electric guitar. Dave Oberle had expanded his percussion outfit to something approaching a full kit, plus extra bits hanging off. I was the only one who remained acoustic, although obviously I'd electrified the bassoon by this stage. And there were little bits of recorder and krumhorn still. We made sure we kept those quirky things in. And it was at that time that we were becoming better well known. And as a result of going to a concert a couple of years previously, my cousin, who's more like a brother to me, came dashing up to me one day I was still at music college then, again in the summer. It must have been the same, shortly after going to see the Doors and the Jefferson Airplane. He said, "Come on, Brian, there's a band playing the other side of Kent, just over the river. I think you'd really like them because they don't just play 4 chords and they have really intricate arrangements." And that was my first go at Yes. They just brought out the Yes album and I was totally excited, and not knowing the protocol of etiquette of rock bands and what have you, I tapped on the door of their dressing room. It was a tiny little club, and I think the dressing room was about the size of a usual closet. But they answered the door, and I kind of gushed, and soon became really good friends with John Anderson and Chris Squire. Well, all of them, but initially those two. And Richard and I would go to the odd rehearsal of theirs. And then we used to hang out in the studio with them when they recorded their next album, Fragile. And Close to the Edge. So there was a kind of mutual admiration society going on between the two bands. In fact, I think 3 out of the 5 members of Yes came to that concert that you talked about at the Old Vic Theatre, which was really nice.
Yeah. Well, I like really enjoy early Yes material. Time in a Word is one of my favorites.
Yes, wonderful record.
It is. It is. I was lucky enough to see them a couple of times in concert, but it was much later, We'll then talk about the circumstances that led to the band being signed to American label Bell Records.
That was only for America.
Okay.
I think Transatlantic must have licensed Mr. Davis, as it was then, who was in charge, for America.
Okay.
Which enabled us to have some kind of a presence when we were over there touring with Yes, which was in the winter of '74. It was quite an astonishing experience for all of us. None of us had ever been to America before. I think some of us hadn't been on an aeroplane before. And we did 33 concerts in 38 days with a plane hop between each city. There was no road trip at all. And it included the Madison Square Garden and the Houston Astrodome.
Ah, okay. So that's as close as you got to me, I imagine, because I'm in Dallas or close to Dallas. So Houston would have been the closest to where I am. Well,
I think so.
Talk about some of the culture shock that you guys went through coming to the U.S. and some of the shows.
Well, I think I was the only one who stayed on after we'd opened the show for them
Mhm.
to listen to Yes. I absolutely loved that album that they were touring, Relaya, which is possibly the most far out that they ever got experimentally.
Uh-huh.
The Gates of Delirium is quite an extraordinary track and full of dissonance, but it all turns out beautifully in the end.
Right.
And so I'd meet people backstage afterwards. I always remember when we were in the Carolinas. I can't remember what city it was, but I was chatting to some people, friends of Yes, I imagine, afterwards, and they said, "What are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I don't really know." And this girl said, "Everybody parties after the gig." So I went and partied with them.
You got that down. You got that accent down there.
Well, thank you, sir.
All right. You must have been practicing that one quite a bit. Anyway, we could get sidetracked. Why did Graham Taylor and Malcolm Bennett leave after the 1975 album Rain Dance?
Gosh, let me think a second here.
Sure.
The actual circumstances of recording the album were quite idyllic. Again, we recorded in a residential studio, but it was done in Cornwall, right at the foot of England, on the west, the very west part of England, and it was in the middle of a heat wave. This studio was in a large shed just below a mill. It was called the Sawmills, which was in its own creek off the tidal river Foy. So you could only get to the studio when it was high tide, when there was water in the river. In fact, all the equipment had to come on a small barge from the nearest village, which was exciting. Or you could walk along the single track railway line, which followed the river all the way down to the nearest town. And as usual, we hadn't written any music before we went in there. You'd never get away with that now, I know, but that's the way we used to do it. And unfortunately, the record company were rather losing faith in our ability to earn them any money, I think, by this stage, because we'd always been quite a well-kept secret. And we were under quite severe pressure to be more commercial, although you might not get that from hearing the record, but that was our attempt at it. And after about a month, they rang up and said, "We're pulling the plug on you. You've got 2.5 days to finish whatever you're doing and mix the album." So we had a continuous 58-hour mixing session to get everything down on stereo. And then when we presented it to them, they decided that 4 of the tracks were not suitable for their aim. Us having taken a lot of time and thought as to track order. Track order was a big thing for LPs because people did actually listen to at least one side of a whole album at a time. Whereas now people just listen to a track and then they listen to something else. And I understand that, but it was a savage shock to us that they'd taken that attitude and rather sabotaged our whole outlay or layout.
Yeah, that is,
However,
that
never
is
mind.
that is unfortunate.
I still haven't answered your question as to why Malcolm and Graeme left.
Yeah.
I think it was largely down to musical differences. They wanted to do something a little bit more, well, it wasn't punk yet. Punk was another couple of years, a bit more garagey. I think they wanted to be a bit more basic and less flowery and elaborate. Whereas the remainder of us were still we were ever more proggish and complicated, overcomplicated perhaps.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned Treason, the final album from 1977, more rock oriented, but I think as you referred to, punk music kind of sounded the death knell for the band.
Yes, it did. Punk and new wave came along.
Yeah.
And one of the two main music newspapers in England, the New Musical Express, they wrote us off as being boring old farts. And perhaps at that time, we'd said everything we needed to say at that time, although I know that's really easy to say in retrospect. In fact, I would have loved us to carry on. But in fact, Richard Harvey was beginning to spread his wings and write. He'd fallen into writing commercially, which was a big thing for him. Advertising jingles, corporate video soundtracks, what have you. And so we curled up on the carpet in about July 77. And I was a bit thunderstruck. I felt like all the carpets that I was standing on had been pulled out from under my feet.
Yeah.
Because I'd just been chucked by the first love of my life, and the band had folded up, and the friends who I was staying with, who was an old school friend, they were expecting their first child, so they needed the room back. So suddenly I was homeless, girlfriendless, and bandless. And I ended up squatting for a few months around town, and I played in a few wine bars with Gryphon's last guitarist, who was a lovely man, Pete Airy. And then I was pretty uncontactable because living in squats, I didn't have a telephone, but Dave Oberle, my old mate, the percussionist from Gryphon, managed to get in contact with me and said, "We've had a call from Gabriel Yacoub, who runs a band in France, and they want you to go over there and try out for them." So I said, "Oh, really? Okay, lovely." So I got in my, that was Malacorn, yes.
Okay.
So I went over for a long weekend to try out with them, to see whether I was right for them and whether they were right for me. A long weekend turned into a month, and we got into serious rehearsals for gigs. I then came back and picked up all my stuff, all my kit, and stuffed it all in my Volkswagen camper van and went over to France and spent a very happy 2 years playing with them. Again, I was playing bassoon, krumhorns, recorders, but I was also playing keyboards for them as well. And the guy who I replaced in the band, who'd left, I got on very well with him. And shortly after joining them, he asked me to help him with his first solo album. And I did a huge amount of session work on that. Hugues de Corson. He'd teamed up with a school friend of his, a poet who became quite well known, very well known, in fact, in France, as a novelist. They'd written a whole bunch of songs in their last year at school, and Hugues revived these and wrote arrangements for them. I wrote some arrangements, and the album came out called Fond de Tiroir, which was the bottom of the chest of drawers, as if it was hidden under old underwear and fabrics and what have you. And it's a beautiful album.
Yes, I haven't heard that one, but I've heard several songs from Alicorn, and I really enjoy their style. I really like it. It's a different take on the folk music. And I like it very much. Here we go. You also, after the band broke up, you began writing music for commercials, TV, and film.
Yes, that was after I came back from France. So we're going to 1981 now. Okay. And when I got back, Richard Harvey very kindly put me up in his house. And so you should get into this, Brian. He said, it's great, you get paid twice. Once when you record it and once on royalties, which was a complete refreshing change for me. Sometimes we didn't get paid at all in Gryphon. So yes, the 80s were very much more of a studio environment for me, with a few exceptions.
Yeah. I've heard that the jingle writing could be a very lucrative business.
Especially if you could get onto singing on them, even if it was just backing vocals. Our English acting union, Equity, had made a very lucrative deal with the advertising industry, and you get a check out of the blue months later for a significant sum, having done a few oohs and ahs on something which you've completely forgotten about by then. Nice.
Exactly. Well, during the 80s, speaking of that, you and Richard released a couple of albums. And then you and I'm going to mispronounce this, I'll just say the last name, the Irish musician, Mr. Trench. How do you say the first name?
Oh, Fiacre.
Fiacre, okay. Fiacre.
Yes.
I would have said that all wrong. Okay. You
Yeah,
also
lovely
did
man.
Another album. And then on one of my favorite labels, KPM, the one specializing in all that great library music from the past. Yeah, that's always been one of my favorite labels, that KPM.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Go back to one of my first interviews, John Cameron. Are you familiar with John Cameron?
I know his name, but I don't know him personally.
He specialized in that kind of library music, easy listening. In fact, one of his, I have a YouTube channel where I just post songs from various artists. And one of them I posted was one that he wrote, and it actually has the most views of any song I've ever posted.
Good grief.
Yeah, and it's just that really relaxing type, you know what I'm talking about, that easy listening, breezy kind of music, you know.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, that's right up my alley. I've been into that for quite some time. So,
I'll write you one.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds like a deal. Yes. Yes. I would be very appreciative of that. Well, talk a little bit about the new Scorpion band. Are they still together?
We are still together, but we're rather moribund now. That is to say, it's very, very difficult for us to get gigs these days. Our main singer and squeezebox player, Tim Laycock, had a couple of heart attacks and decided to bow out of the band. And although he's still playing, he doesn't like touring at all. He just restricts his activities to his home county of Dorset and does little local things. And we get 1 or 2 gigs a year. We've got one coming up where we're doing a series of workshops for people during the day. And then we do a folk concert in the evening. But it's very few and far between. We did close to 70 concerts one year, 2005, which was called Britain's Sea Year, which celebrated the big sea battle against Napoleon. Waterloo, was it? Yeah, I think so, yeah. Trafalgar, sorry. Trafalgar, yeah. And we had costumes made of English seamen of the Napoleonic times, so 1805 to 1815, roughly. So we had a couple of officers. In fact, Robin, who played all the fretted instruments, looked remarkably like the famous picture of Lord Nelson dying on the deck of the ship of HMS Nelson. So he was obviously an admiral.
Right.
I was just ordinary seaman Gulland, midshipman Gulland, which was fine because my uniform was quite a bit cooler than his, temperature-wise, and we play all over the place.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, when I was trying to think of that admiral, yes, and you just said it. I'm reminded of the Bee Gees album Trafalgar, and then it's the gatefold you open up, and they're all playing the different commanders and high officers, and then one of them is I forget, maybe it's Barry. I don't know. He's playing Nelson. I don't know, but it's at his last breath. He's dying. But I just think of that image. Going back to that. Well, talk about what was the impetus for the band getting back together for the 2009 reunion concert at Queen Elizabeth Hall.
It was largely down to Dave Oberle, our percussionist, who had gone into music journalism when the band broke up in '77, and he was very instrumental in setting up a magazine called Kerrang, which was very well known in England, heavy metal magazine, and he worked for one of the main newspapers also, and he played in various bands part-time, doing gigs around the place, but he'd always had a hankering to get us back together, and eventually we said, oh, all right, we'll do it. And we rented a very well-respected, mainly classical concert hall in London, the Queen Elizabeth Hall, for a one-off show. And we almost filled it. I think we got 815 out of 900 people there. But there were people from all over the place. A couple from Canada, lots from Scandinavia, people from Belgium, Holland, Germany, France, Spain, Italy, and like quite a lot of kids, a little girl of 12 had discovered our vinyl in Dad's collection and persuaded him to take her over to London from Athens in Greece. And we got to meet her and we had a nice chat, and she was so delighted. So that was very heartwarming. It was a very humbling experience for but that people had remembered the band or got to know them, in her case. And then nothing happened for about 6 or 7 years. And we got back together again and did a couple of gigs a year. And then Richard Harvey was very busy. He was working over in California for Hans Zimmer on the Da Vinci Code, and bowed out of the band. And we decided to carry on, and that's when we made our first new record, Reinvention, which was our first release for 41 years.
Yeah. Isn't that something? 41 years. Well, the magic must have still been there.
Very much so. And with the two new members of the band, there was a different slant. They both wrote at least one piece for that record, and Graeme Taylor and I, who were the other, we were the two main writers originally in the 70s, apart from Richard. We'd had half a lifetime's worth of the music business. So I guess we'd not only matured, but we'd taken on a whole lot of new different styles in which we were able to write. So we managed to carry on being uncategorizable by mixing up so many different styles.
Yeah, that's got to be a rewarding, feeling for you guys to not having been pigeonholed, your whole career. I think that's the uniqueness shines through, I think.
Well, people in the business always try to categorize us, but they always leave out about 19 different aspects of what we do. But there seems to be a necessity for some people to pigeonhole us.
Yeah. And the other thing is people, even fans and music aficionados, want to say, this sounds like, anytime you play a song, a new song for someone who's never heard the band, you want to say, it's like this band, or it's comparable to this one, instead of just presenting it as it is and letting the other person make their own judgment, So
Sure.
you get that, it's like that, too much of that.
It's a human thing. It's a human thing to need to make comparisons.
Right. Well, you did talk about the future tours before that. Now, this is interesting. Your 2020 album, who came up with that title, Get Out of My Father's Car?
It was an incident that occurred in 1972. I explain it all in the album booklet. It's a bit of a long story. Okay, I'll try and give you a short version. We were still very much 4-piece acoustic. We'd been up in London. I don't think we had the instruments together because we were just getting around in my father's little, my mum's little car that she kindly donated to us, which was something pretty tiny. And there was a lot of leg pulling and joshing, do you call it?
Yes.
Yeah, joshing. We were all overgrown schoolboys. Mm-hmm. And constantly getting at each other in a friendly way. And they found me very easy to wind up because I was quite placid and would take it without going off the deep end. I was driving as usual. We were coming back from a meeting or something.
and I finally had enough. And I remember where we were exactly. We were just about to cross the River Thames on the way back home, and I just pulled up on the bridge and said to whoever it was in the back, I turned around and said, "Get out of my car!" And whoever it was piped up and said, "It's not your car, it's your father's car." So I said, "Get out of my father's car!" And they all exploded in laughter. And I realized what a ridiculous thing I'd said. And I was laughing as well. And so that kind of dissolved everything. And off we went again. Very silly. Very Monty Python.
Right. It doesn't lend to medieval references so much, or Renaissance.
No, not really.
So that's why I had to ask about that. I've read some good reviews from both albums. What kind of feedback did you get from fans and critics and like?
Yeah, it's been very heartwarming
Mm-hmm.
how those albums have been received. We've had some very, very lovely reviews from journalists, and people who have come to the concerts seem to really like what we're doing again. Of course, we play some old stuff because we have to, and anyway, we enjoy playing it. But the new stuff goes down very well.
Yeah. And do you notice the fan base kind of expanding a little bit? Some newer fans?
Yes, Dave, who's very up on the computer and our website and what have you, and our followers, tells us that our second biggest demographic is 17 to 25-year-old males.
Uh-huh.
So yes, the young uns have got hold of us as well.
Okay, there. That's a nice demographic. Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go. You have to start marketing to that specific age group.
Yeah, really.
Right. I wouldn't know the first thing.
No, nor me.
Well, so Gullwing Studio is your mobile studio, right?
It's not mobile. It was mobile. It was when I was living up in London. I had a little house. It's the longest I've ever lived anywhere. I was there in this little house for 16 years, and I started off with a very basic 4-track, and then gradually expanded up to, I had 2 16-track tape machines synced together to make a 30-track machine, and then got into computer in a box, which was hideous. And that's when I parted company with being able to have any control whatsoever, and I'd have to get an engineer in to come and operate it all. And I left London in just before the millennium, in September 99. And I was slightly running away, in retrospect, from the music business. Things had been, I hadn't been very clever during the 90s. And I ended up living halfway up a mountain in North Wales, to the west of England, still on the mainland, but in a very remote area for 14 years. And then slightly ran out of money, came back to the southeast and picked up the remnants of my so-called musical career. And that's pretty much when Gryphon started again. And I started writing commercially again. I've been writing more library music. Funnily enough, the KPM album that you liked so much, the guy who used to run that, Richard Harvey co-opted him to run a big section of his library. Richard made a library company of his own. And Peter Cox is head of the department that I write for. And I've made a couple of albums recently with a new friend of mine called Richard Durrant, who's an amazing, originally classical guitarist. And we're like musical brothers, very complementary. I play everything that he doesn't, and he plays everything I don't.
Okay.
So they're both on stream, those albums now. If you want to investigate them, they're on. I'll give you details after we finish this.
Okay. Okay. Let's do that. Let's do that. I appreciate that. Okay. Well, I have to ask you about this and have to hear about this too. About when did you start playing cricket? And you're still playing today. You're still playing to this day.
Yeah, still at the age of 72. I'm not very good anymore because partly because age has caught up with me, and partly because I have an eye condition called macular degeneration, which means that I've got blobs, well, particularly in the left eye, and it impedes the vision quite seriously. So I lose a lot of depth perception and can't really see the ball until it's very near me, which is hopeless when you're batting, because I get bowled out very, very easily. And it's not so good when I'm fielding either, because if I'm called upon to take a catch, I can't see it until it's too late. But yeah, I still play for the same team that Richard Harvey and I set up in 1979. We're the only two oldies in it. Most of the guys are kind of 35 to 45 now, the youth policy. And but they've become very good friends. They're a lovely bunch of people. So we have a lot of fun together. It's just Sunday cricket, where we don't play leagues. We just play. We don't have a ground of our own, so we're a wandering side, and we play villages down in the depths of Surrey and Sussex, out in the countryside, and they're all very relaxed as well, the people we play for. So it's a lot of fun.
A lot of well-kept lawns that you play on, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do they let you play with a handicap? You know, like.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I have to make up the numbers, otherwise we can't field a team.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's nice of them. Yeah. I agree. Well, can you think of anything else? I've kind of run out of questions that you would like to add, Brian?
Well, I think we've covered pretty much everything, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Hopefully.
I think so. If
I hope I've answered satisfactorily.
Yes, you have. You definitely have.
Oh,
And
good.
I appreciate your side stories and your anecdotes that you've thrown in. That always makes it for an interesting viewing. So appreciate that, and for your time, of course. So
You're very, very welcome. It's been fun.
Having said that, I appreciate it. I'm glad it has been. It's been the same for me. And I will send you, once I edit this down, finished video, and then you can, if you like, post it to your social media and let people know. And,
Sure, I'd love to do that.
All righty. All right. Well, Brian, you have, well, the weekend's about over, isn't it, for you?
It is. We've got a couple of hours of daylight left.
Yeah.
Just had midsummer, of course, so it doesn't get dark until 10 o'clock here.
Yes. Yes. Very true. It's coming on almost, well, it's 15 till 2 here. So yeah, we still have a few more hours. All righty. Well, again, thank you, Brian. I appreciate your time and for sharing so much. And I will be in touch. Let's keep in touch. And like I said, I'll get this over to you as soon as I can. All right.
Lovely.
All right.
And we'll be in contact with through email, and
Yeah. Yes.
I'll let you know about those records.
Okay. Appreciate that. Thank you, Brian.
I think there might be something for you in those. I think you
so.
might. Okay, yes, it's commercial music, but we were given a lot of. Well, we were given completely free rein, so we wrote what we wanted. So there's a lot of heart in there.
Yeah. Well, that's what it's all about, I think. All righty, Brian. All the best to you, okay?
And to you. Thanks very much, Greg.
All right, you're very welcome.
Bye now.
All right,
Bye.
All right, bye.